without further ado, please welcome Colin Firth. Got your name?
Got my name.
And Helena Bonham Carter. We have an embarrassment of riches for you this evening. As a special extra this evening, we have Claire Bloom, who plays Queen Mary in the film. And the director of tonight's film, Tom Hooper. Now, these guys have been traipsing around the world doing this for quite some time, so they're going to be quite well oiled. I don't mean in the sense of well lubricated, I mean well oiled in their answers.
That too.
I hope.
That is. It's not apple juice.
So, Tom, I'm going to start with you for two reasons. One of which is that you've said that this is your most personal project. People will have seen, of course, Damned United. I hope that you've seen also John Adams, which for me is one of the great pieces of TV of the last 20 years. And you have sort of a very personal connection to this in that the way that the film was discovered was that your mother stumbled upon it on your behalf. And also there is a sort of slight personal connection in the sense that your mother is Australian and your father is English, and there's something of the same dynamic between them as we find in the film itself. Perhaps you could combine those two into one long and very articulate answer.
Well, the only reason I came upon this material is because I happen to be half Australian, half English and living in London. My Australian mother was invited late 2007 by some Australian friends to make up a token Aussie audience in a tiny fringe theatre play reading of an unproduced, unrehearsed play called The King's Speech. Now, she's never been invited to a play reading in her entire life. She almost didn't go because it didn't exactly sound very promising. But thank God she did, because she came home, rang me up and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I think I have found your next film." And the moral of the story is, listen to your mother. But the reason the material really spoke to me was not because I have any connection whatsoever to the royal subject matter, but because as the son of an English father and Australian mother, one of the narratives of my childhood was my mother unpacking the effects of my own father's childhood. My father lost his dad in the war at the age of 2. My grandfather was a bomber navigator, killed in 1942 at the tender age of 30. And in fact, I dedicate the film in his memory. And as a result, my dad was packed off to full-time boarding school at the age of 5, and it was that era of cold baths, even in the middle of winter, outside loos with no doors, corporal punishment, all those great British educational innovations. And my mum was brilliant at saying, with the kind of Australian freedom to challenging the English orthodox way, she was brilliant at saying this obviously would have affected your dad, and it's up to us as a family to unpack those effects. And I went from having a father who was not amazingly connected to now a dad who says, you're one of my ribs. And that's really thanks to my mum. So my mum is kind of like in a much milder way, obviously, but she's like a Lionel Logue figure to my father in our family.
Yeah. Colin, we're going to cut straight to the question of the stammer, because I know that question would come up from the audience even if I didn't ask it. But the thing that in reading your comments about playing the role that interested me the most was that in a strange kind of way people seem to fasten on the idea of the stammer and playing the stammer as some kind of trick. But you wanted to get a little bit beyond that, and it struck me that one of the things that happens when he's approaching the words that he can't quite get out is that he is engulfed by this silence. There's a weird way in which he seems to live in fear of those kind of being swallowed up by those silencers, and you get something going. Actually, sometimes even in your neck, there's almost like a muscular thing where he's trying to sort of pull himself back from the brink there. Can you just say a little bit about that?
It was the accompanying fear and and his means of tackling it that I found most interesting about it. I mean, we can focus all we like on what happens technically to a person who's stammering, and I think that is of interest. And but I don't think it's necessarily helpful to the person who stammers, and B, necessarily helpful dramatically for our story. What we need to understand is who this man is, and we judge that according to how he negotiates his obstacles. And in this case, the stammer was obviously, it loomed very large, but it's how it informed everything else in his approach to life. I think that all the descriptions we have of George VI as a young man, as Prince Bertie, as a timid, retiring, apologetic, a lot of people would judge dim-witted young boy, which are completely, just completely wrong. I mean, if you study him with any depth and look at what he wrote and what he said, there was nothing at all wrong with the fluency of his mind. These all were things that quite clearly radiated out from the stammer. You can get into a chicken and egg argument over, where the stammer came from. But those are the things that interested me. I mean, how the stammer sounded and what was actually happening in his mouth or his throat, that could only be the result of something. And so I think there were two very key things that struck me in terms of being helped, because first you have to help to someone has to help you stammer in order for you to then try not to stammer. And there are a lot of people who try to help people not to stammer, but there isn't an industry there to help people stammer. And
you could start one.
if anybody wants, I can have you stammering in a month. Absolutely. I certainly had the whole crew stammering.
Yeah. No, it was contagious, actually, having said that. Once he started, it was like the whole rest. I mean,
it shut her up for a while.
Well, the thing is, it didn't shut him up. The only reason I knew that we were filming was suddenly he stopped talking. It's like, we must be on, and Colin stopped talking.
The anecdote was interrupted for 5 minutes.
He actually had to overcome a compulsive talker.
Oh, there we go.
He's non-stop.
It is. Sorry, you're interrupting me. But David Seidler did say...
He's actually not gone off
David Seidler, the writer.
Yeah, David was... he described it as being underwater. And that was very helpful. And the other thing was Tom and I watched a piece of footage of George VI in a state of complete block, giving a speech rather like the one you see in the beginning of the film here, where his jaw and his neck was clearly working, but it was something very readable, his vulnerability in that moment. And so that was all information that helped me do something which only one can do. It's just a journey of the imagination, really.
He's done stammers before. I just thought I'd add that. But you did a tumble down stammer, didn't you?
No, there was no stammer in Tumble Down. I did a film called Month of the Country.
Oh no, Month of the Country, sorry.
Which is, there was a First World War veteran, and there was a play called 3 Days of Rain. And so, but they tend not to be a one-size-fits-all.
He doesn't really know. Stammerer.
Get
Same
my
choices.
stammer out of the drawer.
Yeah, it's like me and Queens. I did a Red Queen, and I just go Green Queens. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Same choices.
I think I'll just let you carry on, really. I mean, I hardly know why I bothered to turn up. Claire, if I can try and bring some order to this, to the proceedings. We take, in a strange kind of way, the royal family appears at least to be more accessible to us these days. They're kind of, there's almost like a sort of little soap opera now around the royal family. But at the time that this film is set, and this is made clear in the film, the royal family was locked away, really, basically, and until these newfangled things like the radio came along. Nobody really knew who they were. They just, as they say, you just had looking good in uniform, not fall off a horse. That left you with not a lot to go on in preparing for your role, Queen Mary. But I know that Tom is an avid researcher. How did you then go about developing the role without access to that kind of material you might have now?
I didn't have a great deal of time, quite honestly. I went straight to YouTube, that great institution, and there was a very short footage of Queen Mary speaking. I was actually interested in how people spoke then, as opposed to the way the Queen, for example, spoke when she was young. Queen Mary did not speak in that very, very, very crisp little voice at all. She spoke as we do, much more open vowels and open. That's just a basic thing. The other thing is that's mentioned in the film, the tragedy of her son, John, which I feel must have affected the epileptic prince who was hidden away because, of course, the royal family couldn't have a disadvantaged kid. So it simply made me understand that she wasn't this rigid, figure. And I had met Queen Mary, if you can call it that. I was presented to her in a box in a play that I was doing when I was 18. And I just remember this figure with certainly a wig, grey wig, and a wonderful, huge, these are a joke, huge diamond earrings. But again, it was as though she was a picture on the wall. It was not a human being I met at all. But somewhere underneath there had to have been a woman. And I think that woman had suffered a great deal. Yeah. If I were married to George V, I would have suffered a great deal. Because if he was a martinet with his sons, he must have been a nightmare with his wife. And I think those marriages at that time were, she was a princess of Teck, which I think is Germany, is it? Not sure. Anyway, yes, they were marriages of not convenience, but political. What's the word?
Political is good.
Yeah, political marriages. So I doubt there was any love. There obviously was towards the end, because I think if you live with someone for 60 years, or whatever it was, you eventually get fond of them and even their peculiarities. And she did have, sons, wonderful sons, and a daughter. We know little about her, frankly, and one had to make up the fact that she was a woman who was forced into that incredibly rigid position, and we know nobody can be that. So what else was she? A woman who had suffered, and that I can do.
We best not get into that now because we've only got 45 minutes. Helena, the last time we saw you play a queen in Alice in Wonderland, you had a somewhat enlarged head and a somewhat extravagant personality, shall we say. I think I'm right in saying you were working on Harry Potter, playing Bellatrix as well, weren't you, when the call came for this? So then you had to modulate yourself down a few notches to play this character. I thought it'd be good for me,
yeah. No, I was doing Harry Potter, which is during the week, and then Tom said, would you mind playing the Queen Mother on the weekends? I said, yeah, sure. I only have 2 children. They won't ever see me in their mind, whatever.
Yeah, sure. I don't remember hearing
no,
sure.
I never saw you. I never actually.
Accepted the role.
I actually never said yes to him. That's the peculiar thing. He kept on sort of asking. I just wanted to have a week, a normal, week job.
Made it terribly clear to the rest of us.
Yeah,
Some of us have got homes to go to.
It was quite
Tom's on another setup. Sorry, how long is this
no.
timer going to take? This particular my supportive.
No, unfortunately, we had a sort of anti-chemistry, him and me, because whenever he looked at me, on camera, or whenever I was on camera, I looked quite supportive. But whenever he looked at me for support when I was off, I was just like, apparently, I was always looking at my temperature. I mean, my thingy, yawning.
Talk about your children and
talk about children and say, I better get back. The witch job. But no, I was doing both at the same time. But I did think it was quite good for me to try and be slightly less mad and screamy and externalised, and play somebody who's slightly more nuanced and internal and maybe just more subtle. I haven't done subtle for ages. When the Red Queen wasn't subtle, it was just like, okay, let's try and be subtle and maybe real. Real sometimes is quite good when it comes to acting. So, yeah.
And there was a suggestion, despite her sort of slightly airy sort of quality, that there was a spine there somewhere.
Oh, a huge spine.
Underneath it. Could you say something about that?
Well, I think everyone, it's quite I mean, he had the easy job because no one recognised him. You know, no one knows what George the Whatsit looks like, and but everyone knows what the Queen Mum looks like, and you always think, oh, fluffy and all sort of charming and vague, and in her latter years, at least. And I thought, well, I didn't have long, rather like Claire, we didn't have long, and the thing is, when you play the Queen Mother, you have to...
self-imposed.
I know, it's self-imposed, because I kept on saying no, and then then I suddenly realised I was having a costume fitting. I thought I better learn about this woman. Anyway, every biography is immensely thick, because she lasted so long. So I thought, like, this is not...
I feel like you resent that.
Well, yeah, when you're doing a bio thing, you know, and I like, as Colin would testify...
You like to play 3-year-olds, because
Yeah. That's what I did. Red Queen, 2-year-old, that's what I, you know, and then I thought, oh, God. Anyway, luckily I only had to get to 1939, so I read the first 3 inches of William Shawcross's novel. It gave me absolutely no insight to her character whatsoever. And then Hugo Vickers, who's the unauthorised biographer, he came, and I said, come on, give us the dirt, give us the dirt. This was me dressed as a witch in my caravan. And he said, well, he gave me this thing, which I know the others are so, you know, they know. What did I, do you remember?
What did you say?
No, the quote, Cecil Beaton said...
Oh, the marshmallow?
Yeah, she was a marshmallow, but made by a welding machine.
Yeah.
And it was that double layer that I thought, oh, that gets... She was an expert, in my eyes, on what I gathered, and what I tried to distill from all the information I was getting was I thought she was an expert figure, expert public figure, as expert as he wasn't, and that she had this whole armour, which was all fluff and lovely and demure, and she had the whole neck crit, which was not good for my neck. But underneath, she was immensely robust and strong and very powerful, and probably the more dominant in the relationship. But helpfully so. I think, Tom, we both discussed that it was quite remarkable that the 2 sons married very, very strong women, and one perhaps more, although Wallis herself is now being reappraised actually by Hugo Vickers, who says she's been much maligned, but 2 very, very strong women. And the Queen, I think Elizabeth did help him a lot. I think it was a really symbiotic relationship, and that he drew upon her strength when, I mean, it's common, everyone pretty much said he could not have been king without her, and I know...
It's not, there's no question about it. I think he relied on her tremendously, and there's something that you actually see. I think this is played out in the relationship in the film. There's a single photograph which has always stuck in my mind, which told me as much as anything really about their relationship, which is my character about to, George VI, about to give a speech in Canberra. And was he king then? Already?
No, he was Duke of York.
He was Duke of York. He was in full regalia. I mean, he's standing, my memory has them standing in what looks like quite a lot of empty space, like a parade ground or something. And I read his body language as showing a kind of rictus of fear. You know, he's about to speak. He's clearly absolutely terrified. His eyes are sort of fixed forward, downwards a bit. And she's standing next to him, very much in the posture you sort of see at the beginning of the film, in a way. I don't know if she's actually touching him, but you can see that she's in communication with him. And you can see that was the dynamic, that she was all he had, really, to cling to. And Helena, well, she did that beautifully on screen.
You've got to pace yourself now.
That's right.
Yes. Moving on. Tom, you just before we throw it open for questions, so now is the time to start thinking of those questions, and don't be shy, because you will be sorry when you're on the tube going home thinking, I should have asked them that. If you're going to ask a question, it'd be nice if it's specific to one of our guests, if you could say who it's specific to. But I'm just going to ask Tom, your job, Tom, obviously, among others, was that Colin has talked in a very articulate way about the way he tried to convey that fear and so on. But you too, also in the visual style of the film, needed to give the audience a way into that, inside his head, and in a way find a visual equivalent for that, a metaphor, if you like. And it struck me in that very first scene when Bertie goes to the clinic, as it were, or the rooms in Harley Street. There's a very odd shot, and I still can't quite work it out in my mind, which is almost like a close-up on Bertie, and yet all of the background, and it's a really dominating background, it's that kind of distressed wall behind him, and it's as if he's sort of being swallowed up by the room. And then curiously, when you get the the sort of the other angle of that, looking back at Lionel Logue, he's sort of pottering around. He's got all the stuff around him. He's very comfortable in that space. It's very domestic. It's almost like in that one little scene, you just sort of put them in the place where they were. Can you explain a little bit about that? The close-up thing, I'm very interested in.
I mean, early on, and actually inspired by the footage of King George VI, I knew that the close-up had to be the dominant language of the film, because it's only in the close-up that you reveal the fear that Bertie's always trying to conceal. There's a lot of dealing with stammering is trying to conceal the anxiety, trying to conceal the shock of the drowning. And knowing that, I then became preoccupied about how do I create a visual analogue for what stammering is about when I shoot Colin's close-ups, and I felt that stammering is about inhabiting silence and emptiness and nothingness, and therefore I wanted to put Colin's face in relationship to negative space, in relationship to absence, to nothingness, to big empty walls, and so that was where this idea of framing him against this big distressed wall, the consulting room, the empty wall of wallpaper in Logue's flat, always to keep his face in communication with some kind of absence, whereas Geoffrey is framed against the clutter of the consulting room, the fireplace, the books, the equipment. It's always an image of domesticity. On top of that, Colin was often framed in the corner with a lot of headroom, so that the frame seems to be bigger and taller than him, and he seems to be somehow emasculated or made diminutive by the frame, and made diminutive, and this was, and I also shot quite close. I mean, the camera, on the close-ups was kind of this far away from Colin's face, which gave it a tremendous sense of sort of being very clinically close and stripping away. It was not long lens. There was nothing between us and him. It's a very kind of stark way to shoot. And I also had this sense that by putting the camera that close, particularly on the very first day when we shot the scene where they first meet, having the camera that close puts an actor under even more pressure, and I felt there was a relationship between stammering and performance pressure, and by on the first day effectively shooting a close shot of Colin that ran for 10 minutes. The first time they meet Logue, it was almost like the most pressure I could put on him, which obviously was a gamble because it could have not paid off. But if you look in that scene, Colin's so brilliant in it, and it's always interesting how the psychological effect of where you place the camera. And for Geoffrey, when I placed the camera close like that, he immediately knew that he had to be extremely minimal, because there were these locked off frames which sort of suggested sort of English repression and the idea of a frame as a confining force rather than liberating force, which was very key.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to open it up now, and I'm going to try and get this thing going with the two sides and the people in the middle. So if I don't spot you straight away, please forgive me, but some of you are slightly in the gloom at the back there. Can we have just one there, please, and somebody over here, and another one here, please? Yes. Whoever's got the mic.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much for an incredibly moving film. It was beautiful, so thank you for that. And a question for Colin. You've talked a little bit about your research for the part, so I just wanted to ask you about the pressure of playing a historical figure, and how much did you research and how much did you want to just leave to your own imagination and interpretation? And then when you got onto the set, how much do you feel that research stayed with you, and how much does it just become your own interpretation of the historical figure?
Well, you do both. That question, if one were to put it in general terms, would be it would be dependent on the specific and the nuances. If you're playing Churchill, or you're playing Kennedy, or you're playing someone who's very, very present in the popular imagination, you've got much less room to maneuver because, people will immediately object if you depart from their image. On the other hand, you'll be more of a slave to that. I think I was quite fortunate in that, although one can look at images of George VI and one can listen to audio material and you can verify it against that. People, my generation certainly, of people in this country, didn't tend to carry him around as a sort of cherished image. He's not, with that period, his period of history is, almost fetishized, really, in terms of teaching. We get program after program on television about World War II, and the main protagonists are so much larger than life. Whether it be Hitler, Mussolini, or de Gaulle, or Churchill, or Roosevelt. And so in some ways I did have a lot more room to maneuver. And as Helena was talking about, the certain restrictions, because the Queen Mother is certainly very present in our minds. I knew I had to honour something of the behaviour and the voice and all those things. But I thought, if I've got a bit of room, I'm going to just use that and personalise it and go for it and make it as much my own as I possibly can, because I think there's something very personal about the character that I found on the page. I mean, that I could only convey it by inhabiting it in a way that was very personal and probably very exposing to me. And I even found the stammer, interestingly enough, those silences that we've been talking about are very exposing. Silence can take all sorts of forms. It's a very eloquent component in a drama or in a comedy. What's not said is of gigantic importance. And silence can range from anything from a wonderful beatific thing to something which serves comedy, something which is hellish. And these are silences which a man feels he's drowning in and is doing everything he can to try to climb out of. And I wanted to make those as much my own as I possibly could. And I took little pieces of information that I could get from the way he spoke, as I could understand it. And there were little things I could pounce on. All the recordings, as far as I understand, are post-therapy. I don't think we have any evidence of how he sounded at his worst. But nevertheless, there were bits and pieces. There were some of his speeches, later speeches, funnily enough, which were much less fluent than the one that he delivered on September the 3rd, 1939, where you actually hear the catch in the throat. You hear, and I found that an incredibly vulnerable sound. And it's not that I wanted to think. I didn't think, let's make that sound. I absorbed it as a thing that told me something about what he was going through. And it was almost to me like the sound of an infant who doesn't have language yet. This sound that comes out of the throat. It's just raw human expression. When there's no eloquence, it doesn't connect with what's going on in your mind. And then Tom and I watched this piece of footage of George VI speaking at. He was king at this point, wasn't he?
Yes.
In Wembley in 1938.
Yeah. In Glasgow, the Empire
Exhibition.
Yeah.
And it broke our hearts, both of us, watching it. It was probably the inspiration for how we both went about shooting the first scene of the film. Where you see the jaw go and the mouth go and this abject loneliness of the moment, in which nobody can help him. He may be surrounded by loved ones and well-wishers, or whatever. Nobody can actually walk in that moment and dig him out of that. And so I found there was something almost, extremely childlike about the vulnerability, but also something very, almost its opposite, something worldly and determined and profoundly mature about what he seemed to be dealing with it, the way he seemed to be dealing with it. I just simply have to go on. There is no other way. I will get through this, and when I come out of it, I will just continue. And that was the strange tension of these elements that I found so interesting in studying him and studying the real man.
Very good. Just here, I think somebody has the mic. Yes, please.
That's a question for Colin. I think it's perhaps just an extension of what you've just been talking about, but I wondered, stammering is obviously its own condition, but I wondered if as an actor you've ever experienced any of that kind of stage fright that we've been seeing with the King this evening, and if
yes,
that helped
it's
you.
not stammering, but it does give you an insight, because basically when we're talking about terror, and the kind of terror that's paralyzing, the kind of terror that you feel there's no resolution to, that big abyss. Yeah, we've experienced that. And I do think that is definitely what a person who stammers will be experiencing. I mean, whether stammering, as you say, is its own thing, and there are a whole lot of issues that accompany that. But I mean, I thought every actor's been in that big black hole.
I think beyond actors, I think most of us have, and I think that's why the film is touching so many people. It's not because we're royal, it's not because, none of us here are royal, unless...
You're pretty close, come on.
Well, I am nice. Okay, queen. But maybe a bit has rubbed off. But no, and it's not, none of it's because we're stammerers, but because I think we're all guilty of, well, not guilty, but we all know what terror's like. And we all go around with a sense of inadequacy. And I think there, but for the grace of God, you know, so, you know what I mean?
It's a terrible moment. If communication dries up when something's expected of you, whether you're in front of, whether at a meeting, an exam, in front of one person, to feel like that it's all just gone. Evacuated. I think most of us know that. It's the anxiety dream.
Yeah. I mean, Colin and I were talking earlier today about how you know, there are two common anxiety dreams. One is you need to move and you can't, and the other is you need to speak or cry out and you can't. You know, so I mean, and almost everyone has a version of that.
Yeah, I mean, your humanity is very largely defined by your ability to use language. I mean, it's, you know, various species use forms of communication, but there is no species, a species other than the human being that sits and talks philosophy or negotiates his way out of a situation using words. You know, it's fundamental to survival and it's fundamental to your humanity. And I think if there's any impediment to that, I think it's very easy for the rest of us, if we're relatively fluent, to underestimate how debilitating it is. And as you said, interestingly, veterans of the First World War, you know, many people did come back with stammers that they didn't have before, but a lot of people also had hysterical paralysis. And I've got all this from the book Regeneration, by the way, so it's not, you know, that I'm an expert. But it was interesting that from what I understood, that William Rivers said that he believed that what the body was going through was some sort of metaphor, that, you know, I can't cry out, or that the hysterical paralysis of the legs was I can't run, you know, I want to escape, but my body won't let me. So I have to qualify this with experts on stammering have told me that it's neurological and it's not to do with trauma and it's not psychological, and so the debate's obviously still alive. It doesn't explain to me what happened in the First World War to people who didn't previously stammer. But
Geoffrey said also, because it is quite a common phobia, you know, public speaking, and that Geoffrey, who was it, the person who said...
Oh, Jerry Seinfeld.
It was Jerry Seinfeld said that, you know, it's so that if you were at a funeral, there's been a survey done that more people would prefer to be in the coffin.
No, well, the survey, yeah, is that fear of public speaking ranks higher than death.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
a fear.
So you prefer to be in the coffin than having to do the homily against, you know, about the person.
Yeah.
You know, most people go, oh, I'd rather die. And actually it is. Everyone says, oh, I died, like, you know, as a performance speech for, like, you know, just...
Yeah, I died up there.
Like, yeah.
Okay, we're going to go there and then here. So there first, please.
Hello there. It was a great film. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. I've got a question for Tom. I've seen The Damned United. It was a great film. Really enjoyed that and loved The King's Speech, which is brilliant. So thank you very much for making them. I see that you received funding from the Film Council, which I believe is going to suffer a not very nice fate in the cuts that are coming. I'd just like to know what you think may be the effect on filming this country as a result of what's going to happen.
Well, it's certainly an irony that the body that made this film possible, and actually will probably make quite a lot of money out of it now, you know, will cease to exist. I mean, I think the good news is that there was uncertainty about the future of the funding, but now we understand that it's now going to be channeled through the British Film Institute, and the government has guaranteed that it will not be less. In fact, it might be more. So we all hope that it's a change in structure rather than the end of the funding, because I can tell you from where I'm sitting, although, you know, it's possible to read on the blogs people who kind of think that we all cooked up a recipe for success. When I was trying to put the film together with my producers, Ian Canning and Emil Sherman and Gareth Unwin, you know, it was just after the Lehman Brothers collapse. Borrowing money was very hard. And if it was an obviously successful movie, it didn't feel like that at the time. It was, you know, it was very difficult to put together like any independent movie. And so that that support through the National Lottery was absolutely vital. And, you know, what an epitaph for the Film Council.
Okay, the time has run away with us, so I'm afraid this may be the last question. If you could do that now, please.
I just wanted to say that I thought the costumes in the film were absolutely marvellous, and I was wondering how much that helped you get into character, particularly when the King is wearing all of his medals. You can almost see that they're almost weighing him down as he walks towards the coronation.
Yeah, I mean, that was a no acting required moment. I mean, nobody wants to walk around, swathed in that kind of bling, really. You can hardly move. I mean, people used to go into battle wearing not much less than that. Yeah, I mean, it was just almost too explicit a metaphor for words, really. I mean, it's not that the Duke of York wouldn't have worn something similar. The stuff I saw in that picture in Canberra wasn't much less than that. But certainly for me, as an actor, to go from my reasonably comfortable rumpled suit to that amount of hardware. You think I haven't worn corsets?
Not many corsets. Oh, okay, now it's
Yes, I think we better draw a veil over that at that point just before he gets it. I'm sorry, we have run out of time. I just need to say thank you all for being here, to all the people out there in the various cinemas around the UK and in New York and in Los Angeles. Nobody asked the question about the BAFTAs or the Oscars, but of course the film has been nominated for 14 BAFTAs, and I have a feeling it may be in the frame for some Oscars, so good luck to everybody with that. And finally, if you did enjoy the film, do encourage everybody that you know to go and see it, even those of a tender age, because as there is a warning from the British Board of Film Classification on the poster, but it does say quite clearly, strong language, but in a speech therapy context. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.